5:58. We got a couple more minutes before this class officially starts. Hello. Good to see you, Heather. Right now it's yours. That's the big one on my screen. Who do we have? Looks like 7 people have joined us so far. Lydia, Elizabeth, Ivith, Amanda, Karina, Alyssa, and Heather. And we got another minute before we get started. I'm going to be a little more on time. Normally I wait till like 2 minutes in the class, let other people get on board. But I sent you all an email saying that tonight's session is going to be short because my son has his graduation ceremony at 8 o'clock tonight. So I need to get over there across town and deal with whatever parking issues and all that kind of stuff. Plus, I happen to know that there's another class member among you all that's also has family that's graduating tonight as well. And maybe there's more. I don't know, but it is the season. It's June, early June. And graduations happen often on Thursdays and Fridays and Wednesdays or whatever, as the school may be and whatnot, whatever venue they can get a hold of. You're cleaning your camera. All right. Let me see, 6 o'clock straight up. The first thing I want to do is a screen share with you all. Actually, before I jump into this, last week, somebody asked for prayer. And I thought, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing to begin class. I would like to begin with prayer. But is there any particular prayer requests that anybody would like to offer? Okay, then I will just do a general prayer. That is fine. Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity to gather with all these people online. And I thank you for how this technology assists our ability to gather over time and space. We ask for your blessing to be with us and that you would grant us wisdom as we explore tonight's themes. This we ask in the name of the beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, now let's get down to the business at hand. The first thing I want to share with you all is the syllabus because I want to point out something as I was reviewing. Where is my syllabus? Oh, here we go. Bam. I want to go over to this one. Y'all could see the syllabus, I hope. Let me know if you can't. Okay, good. You could hear. Okay, good. Thank you. You see how it says 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7. If you compared that to the Moodle, you would have maybe noticed that there was an incongruity. On the Moodle, there was 9 assignments. In my syllabus, there is 7 assignments. The syllabus is really what I want you to consult as far as how you go through the class. The Moodle needs to be changed. And I thought I took care of everything. And then after the fact, I realized, oh, that slipped under the radar. So my apologies. But I don't think anyone's going to complain, unless I'm wrong, that I'm actually trimming back some of the assignments in large part because we're meeting 2 hours online. Not tonight, but normally we meet 2 hours online. So some of the stuff of the assignments that you see in the Moodle, I'm actually pulling from the Moodle and doing it with you, right? So I noticed that what was formerly called, I think 3.4, the assignment on David's fall, that's something we're going to do tonight together. So I removed that from the Moodle. There's one person, a very eager person who got out ahead of all of you and already submitted that thing. So that person's still going to get credit. They're still going to get the 20 points that it deserves. It will either be extra credit or maybe I'll work out something where they could do that assignment in lieu of another assignment. So no work wasted here. Fortunately, no other classmates did the assignment yet. And one thing I want to exhort you to do, if you see any incongruity between the syllabus, like you see here, and the Moodle, particularly when the Moodle has more assignments than is in the syllabus, let me know, because that's a sign to me that I have to go and update the Moodle and make it match my syllabus. And don't hesitate to point out those mistakes or those errors. What's that?
I've got a little one, and it might not even be an error. It could just be me. So I believe, so week 2, under the reading assignments, it said chapter 5 in one of our books, but then the assignment for that book was a different chapter 9. So I'm just curious, is the reading that's assigned, is that like all of the reading for the week? Or was that just like a little blip
So
error?
can you see what I have listed on my syllabus right here?
Let me see.
This is week 2 readings, I believe. Let me make sure.
Okay.
Yeah, week 2 readings.
Which one was it? Oh, it was the Fee and Stewart chapter 9. So we're supposed to read chapter 9 in the book, but then the assignment is for chapter 5.
Interesting. Did it say laws, the laws, covenant stipulations for Israel?
Let me see if I can pull it up. Sorry, I have like 10 different windows and I'm trying to.
Sure, I'm like that too. I totally understand.
Hold on, I'm almost there. Week 2, Fee and Stewart. Where is it? Yeah, chapter 9 and covenant journal.
Okay, I'm not going to switch over the screen so that we could look at it together, but I'm going to look at it real quick since you mentioned it. So if you go to week 2, the Moodle,
yeah, the reading says chapter 5 in Fee and Stewart, but then so what happened was I was trying to do all my reading first, and then like, okay, got it all done, gonna go on to the assignments now, and then I was like, oh no, I have another chapter to
Old
read.
Testament narratives and their proper use. Interesting. So the assignments that week, because I understand why they had you read on the law since we explored the law last week. On the other hand, I also understand why they had you do Old Testament narratives. But I don't know why there's an incongruity because a large part of this I just adapted right directly from the department. So I'm not sure what's going on there, except to say, let me go back and looking at the assignments with you. Like if there was a journal in week 2, did it require you to read that chapter? Did that come up? Oh yeah, but see 2.2 says chapter 9 journal. Interesting. They must have switched that out. Unfortunately, what happens every now and then is they'll do developments on the class, right? So like this same class that was taught last year, a master instructor might have gone in and changed some of the elements of the Moodle. And then when I copy my syllabus over from last year, whatever reason, maybe they sent out a department-wide notification telling me, hey, we swapped out this chapter for that chapter and I didn't get it, so I didn't update it in my syllabus. I don't know. I'm just trying to give an account for how that might have happened.
Sure, no worries. Just wanted to make sure that, but in general, though, we should be able to read all of the readings and then be prepared for the assignments, right?
Yeah, you should be. That is how it should work. And now I need to go and look at both of those and I need to make them match, but no one's going to be penalized for that. Were you able to do the 2.2 in the?
Yeah, I'm still a little bit behind. I've had a rough month. I got COVID during our last
sorry to hear
class,
that.
and I'm just like behind and trying to catch up. But
okay.
Yeah, I was.
So I would say as long as you were basically able to answer those questions, I wouldn't worry about it. Then you kind of just got ahead of yourself because at some point, if you read the 2.5, then you had to go back and read the 2.9. I mean, excuse me, if you read chapter 5, and then you had to go back and read chapter 9 in order to do the 2.2 Fee and Stewart journal.
Yeah.
And you probably got a little bit ahead of yourself because I assume chapter 5 had to be read with respect to Old Testament narratives at some point for this class, but they just moved it around is what happened. So it's not really wasted reading. And if you were able to answer those journal questions and you were able to answer it, and I don't care if you read out of order personally myself. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then now that and again, notify me because now I need to go in and square that and make a decision about what's staying where. So that's always welcome. You could email me, you could text me.
Okay.
That would be fine. Okay. Any other questions actually before we go into tonight's lesson? Everything's starting to make sense, I hope. All right, good. I need to get back where you all. So you all can see the syllabus right now, correct? Okay, I'm going to switch over to, now you can see the presentation program. Yeah, okay. Now I'm going to go to full screen. Let's see if this works. From current slide. Did it blow up full screen for you all?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. This is what we're doing tonight. And again, I'm going to try to wrap up actually just before the hour, just before 7, because I should be actually leaving my place at 7 in order to get where I need to go. So like I said in the email I sent to you previously, it's going to be a quick session tonight. For those who didn't make it, I will upload this in that section called the Blessed Bible Hour ×2 that's found in the Moodle. I do prefer you all to show up to the live session as opposed to just doing that. It's really supposed to be there's a safety net if you couldn't make it to the live session. We have more interaction with to get one another in real time when you're actually here. Also, I sent you email that has these questions, and the reason why is that way you could consult it when there'll be some time in our lesson where I'm going to give you some think time, and you could just look at that email to review the questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at David's fall. David is the second king of Israel. The first king of Israel was Saul. Saul did not follow God's ways. And as a result, his dynasty, his lineage would no longer sit upon the throne. David was anointed to replace him. As the scriptures refer to David, he was a man after God's own heart. But as we're going to see tonight, David is not without his faults. And we're talking a major fault indeed. But be that as it may, what I wanted you to know, the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because to kind of give you a quick overview, as you know, under the ministry of Moses, Israel was set free from slavery in the land of Egypt. The Egyptian army pursued the Israelites. An act of God drowned them in waters as the Israelites were crossing the Red Sea. Then the Israelites, due to their own faithlessness, wandered in the desert for 40 years. The next generation, the generation of Joshua, was the generation that made it into the promised land, okay? When the generation of Joshua made it into the promised land, they did not yet have a king. They instead had an era of judges, a long historical period where there was no king in Israel. Instead, there was a bunch of judges that presided over Israel. And you could read about these judges in, fittingly, the book of Judges. One thing I'll say about the book of Judges is that it was not a good time for Israel. It was a time of confusion, a lot of brokenness, chasing after idolatry, a lot of oppression, a lot of violence. And the hope of Israel is that if a king was put on the throne, perhaps some order would be established throughout Israel. And in many ways, the kings of Israel did not do much better than the judges. There were some periods where there were just kings, and therefore Israel was led into justice and into covenant faithfulness. But there were more corrupt kings, unfortunately, than there were just kings. David largely would be considered a righteous king, but certainly he was not without his faults, and certainly not without a major fault, as we're going to read in tonight's story. So how this is going to go is we're going to take turns reading 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through chapter 12, verses 25, to give you like this episode in David's life. And then after that, we're going to process these questions together. I'm going to give you a preview of these questions, but what you can do as we're reading is you can pull these questions up on the email I sent you, right? So if you have another tab, that will add another tab to the lady who has like 50 tabs already open, as she confessed to us a few moments ago. Sorry about that. But you could open up those questions in the email, another tab, and consult that as we're reading through the story. But let me review this with you real quick. What we have is two sets of questions, one related to the plot of the story and one related to the characters of the story. And that first, hold on, I need to move my bar real quick. Let me put it up here. There we go. So the first set of questions about the plot are this: who is telling the story? What is the setting of the story? Where is it taking place? Briefly outline the story and identify where the narrator spends most time in telling the story. What is the central problem or conflict of the story? Who drives the action of the story? Who commits most of the activity, in other words, of all the characters in the story? And what motivates this person's actions? So that's plot questions. Character questions. Who are the characters in the story in order of development? What are each of the characters like? Describe them in terms of personality and characterization. And point to specifics in the text to support your conclusion. In other words, what do they say? What do they do? Point to those kind of specifics in the text. By the way, this corresponds to a sheet that I gave you that has to do with literary analysis that's found in your syllabus. So it will break down in that sheet what I mean by plot, what I mean by character and characterization, what I mean by conflict, all that kind of stuff. But I will probably go over some of this with you, what those mean in context as we unpack this together. So with that said, I'm going to get out of this right here. And I want you to keep these questions in mind as we read through it, right? These are the kind of things you want to be thinking about as we read through the story. So I want to get out of this. No, don't do that. Oh my goodness. Stop. I want to get out of this. There we go. And I'm going to share a new screen with you all. And it's going to be your web page, but I'm going to add 2 Samuel right here. I should have put this up beforehand. That would have been good planning. 11. All right. David and Bathsheba. What I like to refer to as Bathsheba Gate, like Watergate, like a political cover-up, as you will see as we go forward. So I'm going to read about like 5, 6, 7 verses, somewhere around there, and then I'm going to start asking for volunteers. So prepare yourselves. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I am pregnant." Now, just in case you didn't get that, I could have said it like this: "I am pregnant." Dun, 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 right? That's a big dramatic reveal right there. I'll go forward a few more. So David sent this word to Joab: "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was doing, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. So will somebody take it from here, verse 10, all the way through, I'll say, 15?
I can.
Please.
So David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die."
All right. 16 down to 24. Will somebody read that, please?
I will.
Thank you.
So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the walls? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerub-Bishah? Didn't a woman drop an upper milestone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez?' Why did you get so close to the wall? He asked you this, then say to him, moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite died, is dead. The messenger sent out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had said to him, sent him to say. The messenger said to David, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.
Very good. Thank you. Now we're going to move. That was 25. I'll finish off this, then we'll move into the next one. David told the messenger, say this to Joab. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as the other. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So now let's see what happens. Could I get somebody to read 12 verses 1 through, ooh, that's a long one, 1 through 6, verses 1 through 6, 12, 1 through 6.
So the Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there are two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb he had bought. He raised it, and and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity.
All right, very good. So can I get somebody to read 7 through 14?
Then Nathan said to David, you are the man.
I'll
This
read it.
Lord,
We already have somebody reading. Wait, who started reading?
I did, Elizabeth.
Okay, continue. And then the other person will get the next set.
Okay. You are the man. This is the Lord, the God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if this had been too little, it would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to, his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites.
Ammonites. Sorry, look at the wrong thing. Ammonites. Go ahead.
Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. Up to what verse did you say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, down to 14.
Oh, okay. This is what the Lord says. Out to your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to the one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sins. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you shall utter contempt for the Lord,
Yeah.
the son born to you will die.
Okay, good. Thank you. Bringing this up. 15 through 20. The next person that was going to read.
After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights lying in sackcloth on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied. He is dead. Then David got up from the ground after he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food and he ate.
Okay. And I'll finish off this last section. His attendants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now that the child is dead, you get up and eat. He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. And because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedediah. And that's the end of that story. Okay, so now let's go back to the questions. And bam. Again, let's review this. Who is telling the story? What is the setting of the story? Briefly outline the story and identify where the narrator spends most time. What is the central problem or conflict of the story? And then the characters. Who are the characters in the story? In order of development, like who is the story spend most time talking about? Who does the most in the story? That's development. What are each of the characters like? And again, that's describing them in terms of personality, characterization, and you do that by looking at their actions and their words. And we develop kind of a personality profile through that. So with that, let's go back up to the top and discuss this together. Who is telling the story?
This is Samuel. This is his book.
Yeah, okay. Now, I agree with you. That's probably the case.
I'm just the narrator.
Right. Did you just put the narrator? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, and sometimes the narrator is just an unknown person, right? That's fair to say narrator because sometimes the narrator doesn't identify himself. But it's also a good guess to say, well, the book is called Samuel, so perhaps the author is the narrator, right? This is where it gets a little complicated. Who is the name of the prophet that went to speak to David and confront him?
Prophet Nathan.
Yeah, right. So the thing is, Nathan inherited Samuel's mantle as a prophet. Samuel dies, Nathan takes over. While Samuel was alive, Nathan was probably a kind of apprentice to Samuel, groomed to take over his ministry when he dies, right? So even though the book is called 2 Samuel, or 1 and 2 Samuel, and actually in the Old Testament, it was just one book. We broke it into 2 books, all right? But in the Old Testament, in the time that it was originally written, it would have just been one long scroll about the kings of Israel, particularly on focused on Samuel and on, on Saul and on David. Anyways, so with that being said, Nathan is also contributing to this book that we call Samuel. And therefore, we could probably guess that he is the narrator at this point. But either way, you could have just written the author of 2 Samuel or one of the authors of 2 Samuel. You could have said Samuel. You could have said Nathan. You could have said a prophet, right? Either of those will be fine. Because the fact is, at the end of the day, the narrator is telling, whether we're talking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or we're talking 1 and 2 Samuel or Kings, or we're talking the book of Isaiah, the authors are prophets. All of them are some kind of prophets inspired by God to speak the words of God, whether it's words of God about historic events that happened in Israel, or words of God exhorting Israel to return to the covenant and warning them of what calamity will fall upon them if they don't. All of those authors can be considered prophets of sorts, right? So you could just say it's a prophetic narrator, generically speaking. Any of those are fine. What is the setting of the story?
Within Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Where specifically did most of the action take place that we read about? Within Jerusalem.
Was it the palace?
Yeah, David's palace. Very good. Jerusalem, David's palace. And actually, we have a time frame. It was in the opening verse. Anybody remember that?
Spring.
During the battle.
Yeah. Somebody said spring and then something about battle. Off when kings often go off to war. Now, what's interesting is I want to flip back actually, because I want to point something out to you. So I need to get out of this. Pardon me. Stop. Yeah. And I need to do a new share. And I need to go back in here. And we're going to flip back to the very opening of this. Stop doing that webpage. All right, here we are. In the spring, as you all already said, good job. At the time when kings go off to war, somebody else said that, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. And then you're supposed to really pay attention to this. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Notice the contrast. And what I'm trying to tune you into, what I'm trying to make you aware of, is when biblical authors give you details, those details matter. Because a lot of times biblical narration is not like regular narration that we get in stories in modern novels. So for example, if any of you read Harry Potter, or if you've read like C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, you get a lot more detail about people, what they look like, or about setting, or about time, about the environment. You get a lot more detail usually in those kind of stories. Not much detail in the Bible. The Bible is really an invitation for you to fill in details a lot of times and to really use your imagination filling in details. The Bible kind of invites that. Now I say all that to say when the author gives you information or details, it's critical. They're making a point. It's contributing to the meaning of the story, right? So let me show you how this works. The author's drawn attention to the fact that spring is a time when kings go off to war, and then there's a contrast, but David remained in Jerusalem. Kings go off to war, King David did not go off to war. There's a contrast. That's a setup. That should be setting off alarm bells for you. Oh, hold on. What's going on? Why didn't David go off to war? What is this about? Was he sick? It doesn't say. Maybe he noticed Bathsheba before and was thinking, I might, try to hang out and get to know this woman, right? We don't know. There's a lot that invites speculation. Keep in mind, it is just speculation. It's good for conversation. And I think that's what God wants through the Bible, is to elicit conversation among people who regularly read the Bible, and they could, take time trying to fill in the details that aren't there, realizing that it's speculative. You know what I mean by speculative? Like, we're not going to make doctrine out of it because we're all guessing, filling in the blanks. We're not going to make doctrine out of that. But I think that when we enter in these kind of conversations about the stories that we encounter in the Bible, it helps us sharpen our moral imagination and our moral sensitivities by thinking about these variables, right? Okay, so we notice that kings go off to war. King David didn't go off to war. It doesn't tell us why. We could speculate, but all we know is he did not do what kings normally do, which kind of sends off some kind of alarm bell, like something is askew, something is not right, right? That's the only thing we get for sure, something is not right, all right? So I'm going to pull out of this. We're going to go back to the question again. I have to do a new share. Bam. And I'm going to do the from current slide. Going back one. There we are. So we have who is telling the story, what is the setting of the story, briefly outline and identify where the narrator spends the most time. So we're going to outline the story very briefly. What are the major events that happened? Name the first event.
Well, I'd say David committed adultery. was one of
Okay.
the first ones. Didn't go to war.
Okay,
He had
good.
Son sleeping with somebody else's wife.
Okay, I want to begin with that one. Didn't go to war and then spotted a woman, somebody else's wife, and slept with her. Okay. What's the next thing?
She gets pregnant.
Okay, good. That's really critical, right? If she doesn't get pregnant, then there's, that's really what contributes to the plot. The plot thickens when we find out that she gets pregnant. Okay, now what happens?
He almost like plans out how to kill her husband. So he moves some stuff around to get this guy to be in
Yeah.
the right place.
Yeah. I want to call that whole thing, Nancy, I want to call that the cover up. Okay. And the reason why, because there's twofold aspects to the cover up. First, he wants to bring her home to lie with his wife, right? And if he did go and lied with his wife and she got pregnant, then, no biggie, because they didn't have DNA tests back then. And Uriah the Hittite being somebody from the Middle East probably looked very similar to David. You know what I'm saying? Olive colored skin, probably dark brownish or black hair. You know what I'm saying? Looked like that. In America, we might say he looked Hispanic, right? But he was actually Middle Eastern. So Uriah the Hittite would have looked very similar to David in many ways. So much so that if Bathsheba had David's child, she probably could have pawned it off as Uriah's child, right? Unless there was some unusual quality that David had that showed up in the baby. Then people might be going, what's going on there, right? But chances are, if Uriah had slept with his wife, David would have gotten away with adultery, right? But Uriah
Is a better man.
yeah, thank you. That's totally what I was thinking. He's a better man. In fact, I think that must have struck at David's conscience, because basically the story records, while my brothers are out at war, while your men are out at war, far be it for me to go home and enjoy the luxury and pleasure of being with my wife, right? And David, that's exactly what he did. Like gut punch in your conscience. Man, yes, he is the better man. Okay, very good. So it's the cover up. First, he tries to get Uriah to sleep with his wife. Uriah doesn't, because he's an honorable man. And then David hatches another part of the cover up, which is, oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to kill him off, right? So, and the way that works is he sends a message to Joab, who is his general on the field, and basically says, I want you to get a battalion of men or whatever unit of military unit to go approach the city with Uriah the Hittite among them. And at a critical moment, the rest of the men are going to drop away. So he no longer has cover, right? And very likely he'll be killed by the enemy, which is exactly what happened. Okay, so that's the cover up. Then what happens?
He marries Bathsheba.
Well, yes, but you jumped a few steps there.
He calls for her to come.
That's
to
true. That's true. But what happened when we turned to chapter 12? It was like a turning of a page, and there was a turn in the story. Anybody?
Nathan
there.
gets a hold of him.
Yeah, that's it.
Tells him off.
That's a good way to say it. Gets a hold of him, gets a hold of his conscience, right? So Nathan confronts him first, right? And the way he does it is genius. He confronts him by telling him a story. And the story is basically an analogy of what David did, right? And gets David to pronounce the verdict on the guilty man, which is himself, right? He flips it on him, basically. The
poor
man is you,
traveler guy.
David. What's that? Say that again.
The poor traveler guy.
Yeah.
The story about the poor traveler and how he didn't help him out.
Yeah, that's it, right? So it's really an analogy. It's a metaphor, or it's like a parable that's really about what David did, right? And so when David pronounces judgment, that man ought to be killed. What a wicked man. Nathan says to him, that man is you. And then his conscience catches up to him, and he knows he's been caught. And by the way, if you know biblical law, Old Testament law, like David would have known, because if you're reading consistently through the scriptures, not that I expect everybody here to have done that, but if you had been, you would know that there was another story that said that kings in Israel are supposed to have their own copy of the law that's found in the temple. They're supposed to have their own copy of that law in the palace so that the king could read it day and night, so that the king could never say, I was ignorant of your law. He had the resources to read it. And David, I believe he was a man after God's own heart, still a sinner, right? But overall, a man after God's own heart. So I think he was very much a person who read through the law on a consistent basis, was very familiar with it. And therefore he knew that according to the law, because he committed adultery and killed a man, the penalty was he should be put to death, right? And so when Nathan confronts him and says, you are that man, his mind is going, oh my God, that's it. I'm dead. I'm a dead man. I've been found out, right? Okay.
Wait, I had a quick question, right?
Please.
So he goes after his friend's wife, but doesn't he already has like a million other wives, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I would just.
So are you thinking like, what's the deal, man? You had like already 20 other women. Why do you need to add another one? Or, you know, that kind
Yeah.
Well, I just want to tell you, lust does not work that way. Lust does not take into account lust and greed in a man's heart, or a woman's heart for that matter. I'm not going to make it just a male thing, but typically men, right? If a man is broken that way, he'll never be satisfied, is what it comes down to. Now, that's not to say that a man is broken that way and he can't be healed. I think men who struggle with that kind of thing can be healed by the grace of God. But I'm saying without that healing, that there's no rationale. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's no logic to sin, so to speak. It's just kind of an appetite that demands satisfaction, right? And that's exactly what's going on with David. Because you could argue, I mean, I think I've heard like not just dozens, but I don't know, like over 100 or more concubines even. So he had wives and then concubines, which were like women who were a part of his harem that were not able to marry other men, that were kind of dedicated to him. They were not officially wives, and but they were taken care of, right? So on some level, it's not a bad gig, but it's not the best, you know, as far as status is concerned either. But this is the ancient world, and that's kind of how it was in the ancient world, particularly among kings. Now, I don't think that was God's ideal for the king of Israel, but apparently God allowed it, right? So, you know, that's kind of the interesting thing is when we read the Old Testament, and you all probably have seen that video by A.J. Jacobs, right? A Year of Living Biblically. And he talked about the fact that he couldn't keep all 600 and some odd laws because the culture we live in doesn't support the observance of those kind of laws. So he had to make some concessions, right? And then he started talking about cafeteria religion and how, you know, you got to take away from it what you can and apply it in the world that we live in nowadays and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, likewise, I think God gave laws to Israel. And it's not that all those laws necessarily expressed God's ideal for humanity. What God expressed to Israel a lot of times was just, okay, I realize you live in this ancient culture. I'm speaking from my perspective. And these things happen in your ancient culture, and it's not ideally what I want, but I'm going to put some laws in place to kind of mitigate or buffer the full effect of some of these negative things that are happening in your culture. And we'll save the ideal for when the Messiah comes. The ideal is what the Messiah will reveal, right? So not everything in the Old Testament, in other words, expresses God's ideal. That's what I'm trying to tell you out of all of this. And so apparently kings in the Old Testament were allowed to marry multiple wives and had concubines, and no prophets really confronted them. Nathan is not confronting King David about having another wife or another woman. It was the fact that she was the woman of another man. That's what he was being confronted over. Okay. So what is the central problem or conflict of the story?
It's not just one thing though, is it? Like,
Well, there's many
Yeah.
things going on, but I think what I like to do is out of all the conflicts or issues, can I identify one that has more gravity than the others?
David's pretty terrible in this story.
David's pretty what?
Terrible in the story.
Yes, he is.
He's sleeping with people he shouldn't be. He's killing people. He's not sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question. I probably
Please.
shouldn't ask because I know you have to leave soon. But if Uriah would have gone home and slept with his wife, would David have played it off like nothing ever happened? And lived a life?
Probably. Who knows? Maybe Nathan would have confronted him still, right? Like not for killing him, but for sleeping with another man's wife.
Those
Yeah,
kinds of
Nathan,
things
but this
usually
is,
catch up to you anyway.
yeah, they do catch up to you, right? Because maybe when Uriah got home after the war, he might have noticed that his wife is acting a little bit differently towards him. Like, hey, what's going on? You know what I'm saying? She might have been feeling a little guilty, or maybe she wasn't completely a willing accomplice in this. Because, you know, when the king sends guards to your home to bring you to the palace, you're probably a little scared and you're just going to be compliant. Who knows, right? This is the conversation, right? This is what I'm trying to say, is that the Bible in many ways is about supporting these kind of conversations. We could talk about, wait, what was it that you just said? What was the issue you pointed out that I was responding to? I do this all the time, sorry.
Me, or somebody else. I don't know.
Oh, Janice said if he would have slept with his wife, then he
Yes.
would never have been killed or whatever.
Right. Okay. So that's one conversation we could have, right? We're not going to do all of that right now. We don't have time. And if I haven't assigned it, I should have assigned it to you. There's some videos in the Bible Project that are called How to Read the Bible. And I think the first or second video in that series, How to Read the Bible, is called Jewish Meditation Literature. And one of the things they say is that really the Bible is a book that's designed to be read over a long period of time, to go back to again and again, and to have conversations about in a context of community where other people are reading the Bible, right? So the Bible is designed to inspire conversations. And one of those conversations would be just that. If David got Uriah to sleep with his wife, would it have been swept under the carpet? Would he have gotten away with it? And we could have that conversation, right? Yeah, he would have gotten away with it because for reasons I just gave you. The child would have looked like another Middle Eastern child, maybe, right? Unless David had some really unique characteristics that would, you know, like red hair, which that might be possible in that culture. Then people might have gone, what's going on here, right? David stayed home, that kind of thing. But also we could raise the question, well, maybe God would still have confronted David. Fine, he wouldn't have confronted him about murdering Uriah, but he would have confronted him about sleeping with Uriah's wife, right? So, and then we get in this discussion about the character of God. Well, God wants Israel to be pure, and God knows that as the king goes, so goes Israel, right? In other words, maybe somebody else in Israel could have slept with somebody else's wife, and God might not have confronted that because that man's not a leader in Israel, right? That man might have faced his due justice at the end of the age when that guy died, in other words. But if you're a leader in Israel and you have more responsibility for the people, then God is more apt to confront you in the moment or shortly after the moment that it happened because of your status and how your status influences the culture. And that's why God, but I'm just trying to give you ways we could have this conversation, how we could get into this. So that's a good question. That's a great question. That's exactly what the Bible is inspired to do, is to get us to ask these questions. Likewise, the central conflict. So I think two things are going on, right? We talked about the adultery and the murder, right? But the main thing I think, personally, I want to give you what I think, because now I told you I'm trying to finish this up like at about 5 to 7. Oh my goodness, look at the time, it flies. I think the main conflict is the cover-up, right? Because he did these bad things, he's trying to cover it up. And so most of the story is driven by, will he cover it up or not, right? And I think the reason why I say this is the big relief happens when David's finally exposed. It's kind of like he's exposed, right? He's vulnerable, he's scared, but now he's exposed, right? And I don't know about you, if any of you have wrestled with a guilty conscience and you've tried to hide things before and you carry the weight of that in your shoulders and then finally it comes into the light, you might feel a little scared regarding the judgment or condemnation you're going to receive from your family, from your friends, from the people that matter. But there's a part of you that feels kind of relieved, right? Like, thank God I don't have to cover this up anymore. The weight is off, right? And that's why I think, for me, I would say the central conflict is the cover up. And the relief comes when he's exposed finally. But again, I mean, I could, hey, I'm your Bible scholar, I'm your teacher, you need to agree with me. I'm not coming at you like that. I'm trying to invite this conversation. We can have a conversation about this on some level. And that's part of there's two things I'm trying to do with you tonight. I'm trying to show you how I read through a story and start analyzing it. And I analyze a story in the Bible by thinking about the plot, the way I'm thinking about it with you now. And then I start thinking about the characters. That's how I analyze it. The other thing I'm trying to demonstrate is that the Bible can inspire good conversations, I hope. So let's move on to characters, and we have about 5 minutes, so we're going to jam through this. who are the characters in order of development? I'm going to actually push this forward by saying the main characters are David. He is the main character. He does most of the action. Then I would probably say it's either Joab or it's either Uriah or it's Nathan, right? And then Joab, and then Bathsheba, and then the child, and then all the soldiers out at war. Because we don't, we hear about them, but we don't see any interaction with them, right? So that's how I would say it's David, and then it's kind of a toss-up for me between Uriah and Nathan, and then it's Joab, and then it's Bathsheba, and then everybody else are bit players, basically, at that point. So we're not going to do what each character is like because we're running out of time. I want you to tell me first, what is Bathsheba like? What's that? Submissive. Okay. Anything else?
I feel like she's kind of passive.
Passive.
She's not strong per se. She gives in very easily.
Okay. Good. All right.
I don't know. I feel like we don't really have a super great idea of like her reaction to it. Because I mean, what would she have done if she'd refused?
Right.
Yeah.
Good. This is totally the kind of stuff I want you all to be thinking about, right? So yeah, on the one hand, she does come across as submissive or passive. We don't really hear her say anything at this point, right? In her introduction in the book of Samuel, we don't hear her say anything. All we know is she slept with David. David got his way with her, right? The fact is we don't have a lot of information about her to really do in-depth characterization, and it's fair to acknowledge that. So it's all really speculative at this point. We don't have a lot of information in the story about her. Now, I do want to offer another possibility, okay? And it's just a possibility. Because like I said, there's a lack of detail, so it invites speculation. But there's that part of me that often thinks, okay, as if Bathsheba didn't know that David did not go off to war, right? As if the people in Jerusalem didn't know that the king stayed behind. Let me begin with that. All right. Secondly, she's bathing, and this is what happened. Women would often bathe in courtyards because there was private. So that bathing happened outside, and you either did it on a roof or you did it in a courtyard, right? So at least it's not like in public view, but it's not like everyone had their own private bathrooms with plumbing. You all get that, right? You know what I'm saying? And there's a part of me that often thinks as if she didn't know the king couldn't see her. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody could see the king, and when he's out in the balcony, everybody understands the view that the king has. So this beautiful woman is out there bathing on top of her roof, and she doesn't know that she could be seen by the king. Isn't it possible she knew? Isn't it possible she knows she's a hot lady, very beautiful, as the scriptures say? Maybe she was a very subtle seductress, and this is her chance to work her way up the food chain and get to the top of Jewish society. Now, I mean, that's wild speculation, but there's some details I provided for you from the text that makes you hopefully think, maybe. I disagree, but maybe.
We can turn the story into a soap opera.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we can. That's exactly, and it is dramatic like that in many ways. And I've often thought if I was a movie director, if I was to do this story, I might flip it around that way. Because actually in 2 Samuel, later on, when it comes time for someone to succeed the throne, and remember Bathsheba is the mother of Solomon, and who takes the throne after David? Solomon. And women had influence on the king regarding championing for their sons. You know what I'm saying? And it becomes pretty clear that she could be persuasive in her own way.
Well, she went and had them tell David that she was pregnant by him.
Yeah. She could have just, right. Yeah, good point, right? So all I'm saying is there's room for like playing around with some variables in this story and how we tell it, how we understand it. Again, it's all speculative, but it gets us into moral discourse. It gets us to think about human possibilities, both possibilities regarding righteousness and possibilities regarding sin and brokenness, right? And I think the Bible is designed to help us have these kind of conversations and think speculatively about this. because it doesn't tell us, it gives us a lot of room to do that. And I think that's part of the beauty and the purpose of the scriptures. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap up with David. What do we want to say about David?
He just, well, because he's a man after God's own heart. So
Okay.
he just fell under temptation.
Right. So if you were to judge David just by this story of alone, just this story alone, what would you say about him?
I wouldn't have anything nice to say.
Yeah. Very good. Right?
I think he was really weak at that point.
Yeah. But he's also conniving. So he's weak, like he gave into his flesh, but he's like conniving. So not like a passive like stooge. You know what I'm saying? He's a conniving person. He's pulling the levers behind the curtain to make
Yeah,
it
he
happen.
plays the part that he was hurt about his child dying. Once he died, he didn't even care anymore.
Well, actually, that's not how I read it. I see why you say that, because you actually kind of gave the response, if I understand you correctly, that the servants gave. Why is it that when the child was alive, right, you were all mourning and on the ground, and now that the child's dead, you're all like washing your face and going to get something to eat, right? And I think that's where David was actually really expressing the fact that even though he's a broken man, an imperfect man, horribly broken in some ways, he is a man after God's own heart, right? Because the way I understand that latter part, where he's pleading and fasting that his child might not fall under the judgment that God said was going to fall upon that child because of David's sin, right? He was doing that several days and God still took the child's life. And then David basically reconciled with God's judgment, right? He basically, this is speculation on my part, but this is how I'm reading David's interior life. The Lord decided to go ahead with the judgment. He did not hear my pleas for mercy. The Lord is just. I got what I deserve. And on some level, it's understood in that culture that the sins of the father can be visited upon the children. We have a hard time with that, right? But on some level, that's the truth because we are relational creatures. If you are the children of alcoholics, for example, there's probably a greater chance that you too will struggle with alcoholism. And if not, you're still going to be struggling with the fact that your parents were not the person they should have been because of their struggles with alcohol, right? Because we are relationally formed. So that's a part of what the scriptures say the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children. I think that's primarily what it's talking about. God made us relational creatures because God himself is relational, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He made us in his image to be relational with one another as God is relational within himself. And he made us to be relational with him, right? And so we're shaped and formed relationally. And so what I'm reading is David said, okay, justice is fallen upon. I accept the justice of God. God is good. And I'm going to worship the good God in spite of the pain that he's inflicted upon me because of his judgment. I'm still going to worship him. That's what I saw him doing, right? So when he found out that his son is dead, it's almost like, what can I do? I can't bring him back from the dead now. The judgment has happened. I'm going to go worship the Lord and honor his judgment, even though it hurts. That's where I see, even in the midst of all this, David is still a man after God's own heart, even though he committed this atrocity, this horrible act. And then if you look at the whole trajectory of David's life, you see him as a person that commits more righteous deeds, if you will, than he does sinful deeds, although maybe that's arguable as well. But anyways, so what we get, I'm going to wrap up with this. What we get is David is a complex person, like all of us. And he's a person in need of redemption, like all of us, right? And I'm just going to leave it there for tonight, because we have basically come up on the hour and I have to get going. Before I let you go, is there any last minute pressing questions that you all have?
Are these questions, like, do we need to type them up and submit them, or is this just an online activity?
This is just an online activity. Okay. That's it. You're good. All right. Are we all good then?
I just have a question about one of my homework assignments. But I don't know. I'll wait till everybody else finishes.
Okay. That's fine. All right, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Enjoy the graduation.
Thank you. Thanks. So what's your question?
I'm looking at my grades, and I noticed that on week 1, everything's graded and I got my full points, except for on not the journal, the 1.1, my experience with the Bible, I got a 0.
Oh, then I just overlooked it. There's no way I gave you a 0. If you did it, I give you full credit. I'm not great.
Yeah, I did it. So I figured it was probably like an accident because it was my experience.
Yeah. Like I'm not gonna. Oh no, that's bad experience. F for that experience. I'm not gonna do that.
Okay, and then
Just send me a reminder via email because I can't take care of it right now. But if you send me an
Okay.
email, I'll respond to it and I'll change it.
Okay, then I'll just send you an email with my other questions then too.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day at the graduation.
Thank you. You have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.